There's a quiet possibility that right now, as you sit here listening, most of reality is missing. Not hidden, not far away, but completely invisible to you. What if the world you experience is less than 1% of what actually exists? What if your brain is not showing you reality, but protecting you from it? And what if the only time the filter begins to slip is when you fall asleep? Because something strange happens every night. Your senses shut down, your body goes still, your awareness fades, and yet your mind doesn't stop. It opens, it wanders, it creates entire worlds from nothing, or at least that's what it feels like. But here's the unsettling question. What if those worlds aren't entirely made up? What if dreaming is not an escape from reality, but a brief encounter with the parts of reality you can't normally see? Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, we're going to explore three questions that scientists still cannot fully answer. What is your brain hiding from you right now? Why does reality need to be filtered in the first place? And what exactly are you stepping into every time you fall asleep? And somewhere along the way, you might begin to feel something unusual, a quiet shift, as if the world around you is just a thin surface over something much deeper. Before we go further, if this kind of deep, slow, mysterious exploration is something you enjoy, you might want to gently tap like or subscribe so more journeys like this can find you. Not loudly, not urgently, just a quiet signal that you're still here. Now, let's begin. Right now, your brain is doing something extraordinary. It is taking in millions of pieces of information every second. Light, sound, temperature, tiny shifts in air pressure, the feeling of your body against the surface beneath you, and yet you are aware of almost none of it. Your brain filters relentlessly, silently, and without asking for your permission. Imagine walking into a crowded room, hundreds of conversations happening at once, footsteps, music, distant laughter, clinking glasses, but somehow you can focus on just one voice, one thread. Everything else fades into the background. That's not because the other sounds disappear. They are still there. Your brain simply decides they are not important enough to show you. Now stretch that idea further, much further. What if your entire experience of reality is like that room, and what you perceive is just one tiny conversation, selected from an overwhelming flood of information you cannot access? This isn't science fiction, it's neuroscience. Your eyes, for example, can only detect a narrow band of light, what we call the visible spectrum. But beyond that, there are vast ranges of wavelengths: infrared, ultraviolet, radio waves, gamma rays, all passing through you right now. Your ears? Limited. They capture only a slice of possible vibrations. There are sounds happening around you constantly that you will never hear. Even your sense of time is not as stable as it feels. Your brain stitches together moments, smooths them out, creates the illusion of continuity. In other words, you are not experiencing reality directly. You are experiencing a version of it, constructed for you. A simplified model, a survival interface, like a dashboard in a car. It shows speed, fuel, warning lights, but it doesn't show the thousands of processes happening under the hood. Because if it did, you wouldn't be able to drive. And here's where things start to get strange. If your brain is constantly filtering reality, Then what determines what gets through? Why these signals and not others? Why this version of the world instead of another? Evolution has an answer, not truth, survival. Your brain is not designed to show you reality as it is. It is designed to show you what helps you stay alive. If something is useful, you perceive it. If something is irrelevant, it disappears. But that leads to a deeper question, and this is where things become unsettling. What if something is real but not useful? Would you ever know it exists? Think about that for a moment. There could be entire layers of reality, present, active, even interacting with you in subtle ways, and your brain would simply ignore them. Not because they aren't there, but because they don't help you survive. And now, we arrive at something even more curious. Every night, this filtering system begins to change. When you fall asleep, your brain doesn't shut off. It shifts. The strict control over your senses loosens. External input fades. Internal signals rise. And suddenly, your mind begins generating experiences without relying on the outside world, dreams. But here's the strange part. Dreams often feel real, convincingly real. You see, you hear, you feel, you react, and only after you wake up do you realize none of it followed the rules. Time bends, spaces distort, people appear who shouldn't be there. And yet, while you're inside it, everything feels normal. So, here's the question that scientists still struggle with. If your brain can create a reality that feels completely real, is without any external input, then how can you be certain that your waking experience is fundamentally different? What makes this reality more real than your dreams? We'll come back to that. But first, there's something even more intriguing, because dreams are not just random. They follow patterns, they repeat themes, they connect to memories, emotions, fears, and things you haven't consciously processed. Sometimes they even solve problems. There are documented cases of people discovering insights, answers, even creative breakthroughs while dreaming, as if the brain, when freed from its usual filters, can access something deeper. Not more information from the outside, but more connections from within. And that brings us to the first layer of our mystery. What exactly is your brain filtering out during the day that becomes accessible at night? Is dreaming just noise, or is it a glimpse of a broader reality that your waking mind cannot handle? Because if your perception is limited, and your dreams expand that perception even slightly, then sleep might not be a shutdown. It might be an opening, a doorway. And we've only just stepped through the first part of it. In the next phase, we're going to go deeper into how much of reality is actually hidden from you and why your brain works so hard to keep it that way. Because the truth is not just that reality is filtered. It's that the unfiltered version might be something you're not prepared to see. And that leads to a much bigger question, yet one that changes everything. What if reality, as you know it, is not the default state, but a carefully constructed illusion? We're about to explore that. And now, let's go deeper. Because the idea that your brain filters reality is only the surface of something much stranger. What if the version of reality you experience is not just incomplete, but deliberately simplified to the point of being misleading? At first, that sounds uncomfortable, maybe even a little extreme, but consider this. Right now, your brain is not trying to show you everything. It's trying to show you just enough to keep you functional. Think of it like a map. A map is useful, not because it shows every detail, but because it removes most of them. A subway map doesn't show buildings, trees, or people. It shows colored lines, simple connections, clear directions, and because of that, it becomes usable. Now, imagine if someone handed you a map that included every grain of sand, every crack in the pavement, every movement of every person. It would be accurate, but completely useless. And that is very close to what raw reality might actually be like. Too dense, too complex, too overwhelming. So your brain edits it, compresses it, transforms it into something you can handle. But here's the twist. A simplified map can sometimes distort the truth. And when that happens, you don't just miss details. You misunderstand the structure itself. Now, hold that thought, because this is where things begin to shift. Your brain doesn't just filter information, it predicts it, constantly, silently, and ahead of time. Before your eyes even fully process what they're seeing, your brain is already guessing what should be there, and then it fills in the gaps. This is called predictive processing. But let's strip away the technical language. Imagine walking into your kitchen at night. It's dark, you can barely see, and yet you don't feel lost. You know where things are. The table, the chair, the doorway, even if you can't clearly see them. That's because your brain is not waiting for perfect information. It's using memory to construct a probable version of reality. And most of the time, it's right, but not always. Sometimes you see something move in the dark and your heart jumps. For a moment, your brain fills in a threat. Only later you realize it was nothing, a shadow, a trick of light. Now extend that idea further. What if your brain is doing this, not just in the dark, but all the time? What if what you are experiencing right now is not raw input, but a controlled hallucination, guided by your senses? That's not a metaphor. Some neuroscientists genuinely describe perception this way: a hallucination that is kept in check by incoming data. And suddenly, the line between dreaming and waking starts to blur, because dreams are also constructed realities. The difference is, during the day, your hallucination is anchored by external signals. At night, those anchors loosen, and your mind drifts further. But here's the unsettling part. If both states are forms of constructed experience, then the question becomes, how different are they really? And more importantly, what else might your brain be constructing without you realizing it? Now, let's open the second loop of our mystery. Why does reality need to be filtered so aggressively? Why not just show everything? The answer may be simpler than expected. Energy, your brain, despite being only about 2% of your body weight, uses roughly 20% of your energy. It is expensive, demanding, always working. Processing raw reality in full detail would require far more energy than your body could sustain. So evolution made a trade: accuracy for efficiency, truth for survival. And it worked. You don't need to perceive every wavelength of light to find food. You don't need to hear every frequency to avoid danger. You only need enough information to make good decisions. But here's where things take another turn. If your brain is optimized for survival, not truth, then your perception of reality is not a reliable guide to what actually exists. It's a useful illusion, a controlled simplification. And once you accept that, a new question emerges. What lies outside that illusion? Not metaphorically, not philosophically, but physically. What is actually there that you cannot see? Because we already know there are invisible layers of reality, radio waves, passing through your body, Wi-Fi signals carrying information through the air, magnetic fields shaping the space around you. You don't perceive them, but they are real. Now imagine that those are just the beginning. What if there are forms of structure, interaction, or even presence that exist beyond your sensory limits and beyond your brain's filtering system? Would you ever notice? Or would they remain completely outside your experience? And now we reach a deeper layer of the mystery, because there are moments, rare, subtle, but real, when the filter seems to falter. Moments when people report seeing patterns, connections, or meanings that feel just out of reach. Not quite hallucinations, not quite reality, something in between. These can happen in deep focus, in sensory deprivation, and or just before sleep. That strange state where your thoughts begin to loosen and your sense of reality softens. You've probably felt it. That drifting moment when images appear without effort. Fragments of places, faces, scenes, not fully dreams, but not fully under your control either. This state has a name, hypnagogia. And it may be one of the closest experiences to watching your brain build reality in real time. Because here, the usual filters are weakening, the predictions are less stable, the boundaries are softer, and for a brief moment, you are closer to the raw process of perception itself. So here's the question we need to carry forward. If your brain is constantly constructing reality, and if that construction changes as you fall asleep, then what exactly happens? At the moment the filter gives way, do you simply lose control? Or do you gain access to something else? Because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more intriguing. What if sleep is not just a passive state, but an active transition between different layers of reality? And what if dreams are not random at all, but structured experiences guided by rules we don't yet understand? We're getting closer now, closer to the edge, where perception, imagination, and reality start to overlap. And when they do, something unexpected begins to happen, something that might change the way you think about your own mind forever. Let's continue. And now we arrive at something even stranger. Because up to this point, we've been talking about the brain as a filter, a simplifier, a predictor. But what if it's also something else? What if your brain is not just receiving reality, but actively deciding what is real, moment by moment? Hold that thought, because this is where the third layer of our mystery begins to open. Right now, you feel like you are sitting somewhere, in a room, in a space, surrounded by objects. It feels stable, solid, consistent, but everything you are experiencing, your sense of space, distance, even your own body, is being constructed inside your brain. Your eyes don't see space. They detect light. Your skin doesn't feel objects. It detects pressure. Your ears don't hear voices. They detect vibrations. And then your brain takes all of that and builds a world, a seamless, continuous, convincing world. So convincing that you never question it until something breaks. Have you ever reached for something and slightly missed? For a brief moment, your internal map of reality and the physical world don't align. It feels strange, almost unsettling, because it reveals something important. Your experience of reality is not reality itself. It's a model, and models can be wrong. Now let's take this further. There are conditions, rare, but very real, where this model changes dramatically. People who lose certain parts of their brain function can experience something called neglect. They don't lose their eyes, they don't lose their vision, but they lose half of their world. Not metaphorically, literally. They might eat food from only one side of the plate because the other side doesn't exist for them anymore. Not because it's gone, but because their brain stops including it in the model of reality. Think about that. Half of reality can disappear without the person even realizing it. Now pause. If reality can shrink like that, what does that say about how much of it you're actually experiencing right now? And here's where things begin to connect back to sleep. Because during waking life, your brain maintains a stable model, consistent rules, predictable structures, clear boundaries. But during sleep, those constraints loosen. The model becomes flexible, and suddenly, space can change. Time can bend. Identity can shift. You can be in two places at once. You can meet people who are no longer alive. You can experience events that never happened. And your brain accepts it, not as strange, but as normal. So here's the question. If your brain can construct a completely different reality during dreams, with its own rules, its own logic, its own sense of truth, then what determines which version of reality you experience? Why this one, right now? Why not another? This is where scientists begin to explore something called controlled stability. Your waking reality is not fixed because it is inherently real. It is fixed because your brain is actively stabilizing it, constantly correcting errors, constantly aligning predictions with input, like a tightrope walker, making micro adjustments to stay balanced. But when you sleep, that tightrope loosens, and your mind begins to wander. Now here's where things get even more interesting, because there is a moment, a very specific moment, between waking and sleeping, where something unusual happens. Not fully awake, not fully asleep. A threshold. In this state, people sometimes report hearing sounds that aren't there, seeing shapes, patterns, even entire scenes emerging out of darkness. And unlike dreams, they are aware that something strange is happening. It's as if they are watching. A reality being assembled, piece by piece. This is not imagination in the usual sense. It feels external, almost real, and yet it's coming from within. So, what is this state? Is it just the brain misfiring? Or is it something more revealing? Because if this is the moment when the usual filters are weakening and the predictive system is destabilizing, then you might be witnessing the raw mechanics of perception itself, not the finished product, but the process. And that leads us to a deeper question. What if your sense of reality is not a passive experience, but an active construction that requires constant effort to maintain? And what happens when that effort stops? When the system relaxes, even slightly? Do you fall into randomness, or do you drift into another layer that was always there, just hidden? Now, let's open another loop. Earlier, we asked, what is your brain hiding from you? Now we need to refine that question. Is your brain hiding reality? Or is it creating it? Because those are very different things. If it's hiding reality, then there is something out there waiting to be discovered. But if it's creating reality, then what you experience might be more like a simulation than a direct observation. And suddenly, a much bigger question appears, not just about sleep, not just about perception, but about existence itself. What if reality is not something you are inside of, but something you are actively generating? Hold on to that. Because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more unsettling. There are moments, rare but documented, when people begin to question whether they are awake or still dreaming. And sometimes they can't tell the difference, not immediately, not clearly, which raises a possibility that is difficult to ignore. What if the boundary between waking and dreaming is not as solid as it feels? And if that boundary can blur, even briefly, then how certain can you be that you are fully awake right now? We're about to step into that question, and once we do, it becomes very hard to step back. Let's continue. And now, we step into one of the most unsettling possibilities of all. What if you've already experienced moments where you couldn't tell whether you were awake or still dreaming? Not in a dramatic way, not in a movie-like realization, but quietly, subtly, a strange familiarity, a moment that feels off, a place that seems real, but slightly distorted. A conversation that makes sense until it doesn't, and then suddenly you wake up and everything rearranges itself. But here's the question that lingers longer than it should. While you were inside that dream, how certain were you that it wasn't real? Think about it. In most dreams, you don't question the world. You don't stop and say, this doesn't make sense. You accept it completely, even when the rules are broken, even when impossible things happen, because your brain is still doing its job. It is still building a coherent model from whatever information it has, even if that information is entirely internal. Now, hold on to that, because this leads us to something called lucid dreaming, a rare but fascinating state where a person becomes aware that they are dreaming while still inside the dream. And when that happens, something remarkable occurs. They can begin to control the experience, change the environment, fly, alter events, but more importantly, they gain a unique perspective. They are inside a constructed reality, and they know it. Which raises a powerful question. If you can become aware inside a dream that it is a dream, then what would it take to become aware inside waking reality that it is also constructed. Now, this is where things become delicate. We are not saying that waking life is a dream, but we are asking what makes it different, what gives it its sense of stability, of consistency, of realness. The answer comes back to constraints. In waking life, your brain is tightly constrained by sensory input. There are rules, physics, continuity, cause and effect. These rules act like anchors. They keep your internal model aligned with the external world. But in dreams, those anchors are loosened and the model becomes free, flexible, fluid. Now imagine, just for a moment, what would happen if those constraints were partially relaxed while you were still awake, not fully removed, just weakened. Would reality begin to shift? Would patterns emerge that you don't normally notice? Would your sense of self, your sense of time, your sense of space begin to change? Because there are states where something like this seems to happen. Deep meditation, extreme fatigue, sensory isolation. In these conditions, people often report a softening of reality. Boundaries blur, time stretches, thoughts become more vivid, and sometimes they experience something even stranger, a feeling that they are observing rather than participating, as if the self, the one who experiences everything, has stepped slightly back. Now, this connects to another question, one we opened earlier, but haven't answered yet. What exactly is the self, the voice in your head? The sense of I, the feeling that you are inside your body, looking out. It feels central, essential, unquestionable. But neuroscience suggests something surprising. The self may also be a construction, a useful one, a necessary one, but not as fixed as it feels. There are experiments where slight changes in sensory input can make people feel as if their body is not their own, or that they are located outside of it. Even something as simple as synchronized touch and visual feedback can shift your sense of ownership over your own hand, and suddenly the boundary between you and not you becomes less clear. Now, bring this back to sleep, because during dreams, your sense of self can change dramatically. You can be someone else. You can shift between identities. You can observe yourself from the outside. And yet, it still feels like you. So here's the deeper question. If your sense of self, your sense of reality, and your sense of stability are all constructed, then what remains constant? What is actually real beneath all of that? And this is where we open the third loop, the deepest one so far. Is there a layer of reality that exists independent of your perception, or is everything you experience fundamentally tied to the way your brain constructs it? Because if it's the second, then reality is not something you discover. It's something you participate in, something you co-create, moment by moment. Now, before that idea becomes too abstract, let's ground it again. Every night you fall asleep, and every night your brain lets go of the stable version of reality you call waking life. It enters a different mode, a different construction, a different world. And when you wake up, you return seamlessly, without questioning how that transition happens. But maybe we should, because in the next part, when we're going to explore something even more precise, There are patterns, predictable stages that your brain moves through as you fall asleep, and each stage brings you closer to a complete transformation of reality. Not gradually, but systematically, as if your brain is following a sequence, a process. And if we can understand that process, we might begin to answer something even bigger. Not just what dreams are, but why they exist at all, and what they might be showing you that waking reality cannot. Let's go deeper. And now we begin to see the structure behind the mystery. Because sleep is not a single state. It's a sequence, a descent, a carefully orchestrated transition from one version of reality to another. And once you understand that sequence, something remarkable becomes clear. Your brain doesn't just fall asleep. It lets go, layer by layer. Let's begin at the edge, the moment you close your eyes and the world starts to fade. This is where it begins. Stage 1. You're still aware. You can still hear faint sounds. You can still think clearly. But something subtle is changing. Your thoughts begin to loosen. They stop following strict logic. They drift. One idea blends into another. Images appear without effort. A face, a place, a fragment of memory, and then it disappears. This is the threshold we touched on before, but now we're seeing it more clearly. This is the moment when your brain begins reducing its grip on external reality. The filter is weakening. And here's the strange part. Your brain doesn't replace reality all at once. It gradually shifts from external input to internal generation, like a dimmer switch. Now imagine what that means. At this stage, you are experiencing a hybrid reality, partly real, partly constructed, and you usually don't notice when the balance tips. Now we move deeper. Stage 2. Your body relaxes further, your awareness fades, but your brain is still active. In fact, in some ways, it becomes more active. Neural patterns shift, communication between regions changes, and something important happens. Your connection to the outside world is reduced even more. Signals from your senses are no longer prioritized. Your brain turns inward. And this is where the construction begins to take over. Now, here's the question. If your brain is receiving less input, but still generating experience, where is that experience coming from? Memory? Yes, partly. Emotion? Yes, also, but not entirely. Because dreams are not just replays, they recombine, reimagine, reconstruct. They take pieces and build something new, something that feels real but doesn't follow the original rules. Now, we reach something even more fascinating. Stage 3. This is where deep sleep begins. And for a while, something unusual happens, while your conscious experience fades almost completely. There are no vivid dreams, no clear thoughts, just darkness, stillness, silence. It feels like nothing. But your brain is still working, repairing, reorganizing, strengthening connections, almost like it's resetting the system, clearing noise, optimizing patterns, preparing for something. And then we reach the final stage, REM, sleep. This is where everything changes. Your brain activity becomes surprisingly similar to when you are awake, but your body is almost completely still, paralyzed, to to prevent you from acting out your dreams. And inside your mind, something extraordinary unfolds. Full immersion. This is where dreams become vivid, detailed, emotional, entire worlds, constructed in real time, with environments, characters, stories. And here's the key detail. During REM sleep, the part of your brain responsible for logic and critical thinking is less active, which means you don't question the experience. You accept it completely. Now pause here, because this is one of the most important points in our entire journey. Your sense of reality does not come from the world itself. It comes from your brain's ability to question and stabilize what it is experiencing. When that ability is reduced, even slightly, a constructed world can feel completely real. Now, let's connect this back to our larger mystery. We asked earlier, what happens when the filter gives way? Now we have a clearer answer. It doesn't collapse. It transforms from a rigid structure into a flexible one, from a stable model into a generative system. And that raises a deeper question. Why? Why would your brain evolve to create such complex, immersive experiences every single night? It's not random. It's too structured, too consistent, too universal. Every human being, across cultures, across history, dreams, which suggests that dreaming serves a purpose. But what purpose? Some scientists believe dreams help process emotions. Others say they help consolidate memory. Some suggest they simulate possible futures, allowing you to rehearse without risk. All of these may be true, but none of them fully explain why dreams feel so real, why they are so immersive, why your brain goes to such lengths to construct entire worlds instead of simple thoughts. And this brings us to another possibility. What if dreams are not just about processing the past or preparing for the future, but exploring possibilities that your waking mind cannot access? Because during the day, your brain is constrained, focused, efficient. But at night, those constraints loosen, and your mind becomes more exploratory, more creative, less bound by rules. Now, here comes the mini shift, the one that changes everything. What if the purpose of sleep is not just rest, but expansion? Not just recovery, but access to a broader range of mental states that waking life cannot support? Because if that's true, then dreaming is not a side effect. It's a feature, a necessary part of how your brain interacts with reality. And now we return to one of our original questions. What is your brain hiding from you? Maybe the better question is, what is it allowing you to see only when you are asleep? Because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more precise. There are moments inside dreams where people experience clarity, awareness, even control. And when that happens, they begin to interact with the dream as if it were a real environment, not passively, but actively. And that opens the door to something even more intriguing. What happens when you become conscious inside a constructed reality? And what does that reveal about the nature of consciousness itself? We're getting closer now, closer to the point where the boundary between reality and imagination begins to dissolve. Let's continue. And now, We arrive at one of the most fascinating turning points in this journey, because up to this moment, you've been a passenger. In waking life, your brain builds reality for you. In dreams, your brain builds reality without your permission. But what happens when you become aware inside that process? This is where everything begins to shift. There are moments, rare but real, when a person realizes they are dreaming. Not after waking up, not in hindsight, but right there, inside the dream itself. And in that moment, something extraordinary happens. The world doesn't disappear. It becomes clearer, sharper, more vivid. Colors intensify, sounds deepen. It's as if the brain, knowing that it is constructing the experience, leans into it fully. This is called lucid dreaming, but the name doesn't quite capture how strange it really is. Because in this state, you are conscious, inside a reality that you know is not physically real, but feels completely real. Pause for a second. That means your mind is holding two truths at once. This is not real, and yet this feels real. And somehow both coexist without conflict. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. People who experience lucid dreams often report something unexpected. At first, they try to control everything. They fly. They change environments. They test the limits. But after a while, something shifts. They stop trying to control the dream, and instead, they start observing it, interacting with it, listening to it, almost as if the dream itself has its own structure, its own behavior, not random, not chaotic, but responsive. Now, this raises a question that is difficult to ignore. If a dream is entirely generated by your brain, then why does it sometimes behave as if it has a life of its own? Why do dream environments respond in ways you didn't consciously choose? Why do characters say things you didn't plan? It's as if there are layers of processing within your own mind that you are not aware of. And when you enter a lucid dream, you begin to interact with those hidden layers, not directly, but through experience. Now, let's connect this back to our central mystery. We've been asking, what is your brain hiding from you? Now we can ask something more precise. What is your brain doing that you are not aware of? Because during a lucid dream, you are not creating everything consciously. You are stepping into an ongoing process, a system that continues to generate even when you are watching it. And that suggests something profound. Your consciousness, the part of you that feels like you, may not be the creator of your experience. It may be the observer, or at least only part of the creator. Now, sit with that for a moment, because it changes the way we think about control. During the day, you feel like you are in control. You make decisions, you take actions, you think thoughts. But how many of those thoughts appear before you decide to think them? How many ideas just arrive without effort? How many reactions happen before you consciously choose them? Your brain is constantly generating, and your awareness is catching up. Now bring this back to lucid dreaming, because here that gap becomes visible. You can see thoughts forming, you can see the world shifting, almost as if you are watching your own mind create reality in real time. And this leads to one of the deepest questions in neuroscience and philosophy. What is consciousness actually doing? Is it controlling the system, or is it observing it? Now we open another loop. If consciousness is not fully in control, then what determines the structure of your experience? Why does reality feel stable? Why does it follow rules? Why does it not collapse into chaos? Because even in dreams, there is structure. Not the same as waking life, but not random either. There are patterns, the themes, consistencies, which suggests that something deeper is organizing the experience, something below conscious awareness. And now we arrive at a possibility that feels both strange and strangely familiar. What if your brain is not just a filter or a generator, but a translator, taking something vast, complex, and incomprehensible and turning it into a form you can experience? During the day, that translation is stable, consistent, predictable. At night, it becomes flexible, exploratory, open. But in both cases, you are not seeing the raw input. You are seeing the translational. Now here comes the shift, the one that changes the entire direction of our journey. What if reality itself is not what you perceive, but what your brain translates from something deeper, something beyond your senses, beyond your usual awareness? And what if, during sleep, that translation changes just enough to reveal hints of what lies underneath? Not clearly, not directly, but in fragments, symbols, patterns. Now, think about your own dreams. Have you ever had a dream that felt meaningful, but you couldn't explain why? A feeling that something important was happening, even if it didn't make logical sense? That might not be random. It might be your brain, working with information that your waking mind cannot fully interpret. And now, we return to one of our original questions. What are you stepping into every time you fall asleep? A simulation? A memory process? Or a different mode of interacting with reality? Because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more precise. There are moments when people bring elements of dreams back into waking life, not as memories, but as changes in perception, subtle shifts in how they experience reality. And when that happens, something unexpected begins to emerge, a realization that the boundary between inner and outer may not be as clear as it seems. We're getting very close now, closer to the point where the biggest question of all can no longer be avoided. What if reality is not something you wake up to, but something you never actually leave? Let's continue, and now we begin to approach a boundary that is far less stable than it appears, because up to this point we've treated waking and dreaming as two separate states, one real, one constructed. But what if that distinction is not as clear as we believe? Let's start with something simple. Right now, you feel awake. Your surroundings feel stable. Your thoughts feel coherent. Oh, there is continuity, cause and effect, a sense of time moving forward, all the things that make reality feel real. But here's the quiet question that sits just beneath the surface. How do you know? Not philosophically, not abstractly, but directly. What is the signal that tells you this is waking life and not a dream? Because if you think about it, dreams also feel real. While you are inside them, they have continuity. They have cause and effect. They have a sense of now, and only after you wake up do you label them as unreal. So the difference is not in the experience itself, it's in the recognition. Waking life feels real because you don't question it. Dreams feel real until you do. Now hold on to that, because this leads us to something subtle but deeply important. Reality is not just what you experience, it's what you trust. Your brain doesn't just construct a world, it assigns confidence to that world. High confidence feels like reality. Low confidence feels like imagination. And this assignment is happening constantly, silently, automatically. Now imagine what happens when that confidence system begins to shift, not break, not collapse, just soften. There are moments when people experience this. A sense that the world feels slightly unreal, not fake, not gone, just less solid, less certain, almost like you're watching reality instead of being fully inside it. This experience has a name, derealization, and while it can be unsettling, it reveals something important. Your sense of reality is adjustable. It can change, which means it is not fixed. And if it is not fixed, then it is being actively maintained, just like we suspected. Now, bring this back to sleep, because every night, your brain intentionally lowers that sense of certainty. It reduces the confidence in external reality and increases the influence of internal generation. In other words, it shifts what you trust from the outside world to the inside one. And when that shift completes, you are dreaming. Now, here's where things become even more interesting. There are moments when this shift is incomplete, when you are not fully asleep, but not fully awake either. And in those moments, something unusual can happen. Dreamlike elements can bleed into waking perception. You might hear a sound that isn't there, see a shape that fades when you focus on it, feel a presence that disappears when you move. These are not full dreams. They are fragments, pieces of internal reality entering your waking experience, and they reveal something critical. The boundary between waking and dreaming is not a wall. It's a gradient, a spectrum. Now, let's open the next loop. If reality is something your brain stabilizes, and dreaming is what happens when that stability loosens, then what lies in between? Is there a middle state where both systems are active, where you are both perceiving and generating at the same time? Because if such a state exists, it would blur the distinction completely. And surprisingly, there is evidence that it does. Creative flow. Moments when artists, scientists, thinkers report ideas emerging, fully formed, not step by step, but all at once. As if they are not constructing the idea, but receiving it. This state often feels dreamlike. Time fades, focus deepens, the sense of self softens, and yet you are awake, functioning, aware. So, what is happening here? It may be that your brain is temporarily relaxing its strict control over reality, allowing more internal generation to mix with perception, a controlled blending, not full dreaming, but not fully constrained either. Now, Here comes the shift, the one that connects everything we've explored so far. What if waking life is not a single state, but a carefully balanced position between stability and imagination? Too much stability, and you become rigid, inflexible. Too much imagination, and reality dissolves. But in between, there is a dynamic balance, a living system, and your brain is constantly adjusting that balance. Now, think about sleep again, because every night you move across that spectrum, from stable reality to flexible imagination, and then back again, seamlessly, without noticing. How extraordinary that transition really is. But maybe we should notice, because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more precise. There are moments when people wake up, but their body does not. They can see, they can think, but they cannot move, and often they experience something else, something that feels impossibly real, a presence, a figure, a sensation, that someone or something is there. This state is known as sleep paralysis, and it may be one of the clearest windows into how your brain constructs reality and how that construction can overlap. Because in this state, dreaming and waking are not separate. They are happening at the same time. And what people experience there raises one of the most unsettling questions yet. If your brain can create something that feels completely external while you are awake, then how certain can you be that what you perceive is coming from the outside at all? We're about to step into that. And once we do, the idea of reality may never feel quite the same again. Let's continue. And now, we arrive at one of the most intense intersection between dreaming and waking reality, a place where the boundary doesn't just blur, it overlaps. You wake up, your eyes open, you can see your room, you can hear faint sounds around you. Everything looks real, normal, stable, but something is wrong. You try to move and you can't. Your body doesn't respond. Your chest feels heavy. Your breath becomes shallow. And then you feel it. A presence. Not imagined, not abstract, but specific, close, watching. Sometimes people describe it as a shadow, a figure standing at the edge of the room. Sometimes it sits on their chest. Sometimes it whispers. And in that moment, there is no doubt. It feels completely real. This is sleep paralysis, and it is one of the clearest demonstrations of how your brain constructs reality. Because during this state, two systems are active at the same time. Your waking perception and your dreaming system. Your eyes are open, but your brain is still partially dreaming. Now, let's slow this down, because what's happening here is incredibly important. During REM sleep, your body is intentionally paralyzed. This prevents you from acting out your dreams, but sometimes you wake up before that paralysis turns off. So your mind becomes aware, while your body remains locked, and your brain, caught between two states, does something unexpected. It continues generating dream content, but overlays it onto your waking environment. In other words, you are dreaming with your eyes open. Now, here's the key detail. The presence you feel is not coming from outside. It is generated by your brain. but it feels external, as if it exists independently of you. And this is where things become deeply unsettling, because it reveals something fundamental. Your brain can create experiences that feel completely real, completely external, and completely independent of your control. Now pause. If your brain can do that in sleep paralysis, what does that say about your normal waking perception? How much of what you experience feels external, but is actually constructed? Now let's go deeper. There's a pattern in these sleep paralysis experiences across cultures, across time, across different people. The details change, but the core elements remain the same. A presence, a sense of being watched, a feeling of pressure. Why? Why would the brain generate such a specific type of experience? One explanation is evolutionary. Your brain is wired to detect threats, especially at night, especially when you are vulnerable. So when the system becomes confused between dreaming and waking, it defaults to a threat model. It creates a presence, something to explain the feeling of immobility, something to match the heightened alertness. But that explanation only goes so far, because the experience is often too vivid, too detailed, too consistent. It feels intentional. And that brings us to a deeper question. If your brain is capable of generating something that feels like an independent entity, then what defines the boundary between self and other? Because during sleep paralysis, that boundary breaks. The other is created from within, but experienced as external. Now connect this back to lucid dreaming. In lucid dreams, you can interact with dream characters, talk to them, ask them questions, and sometimes they respond in unexpected ways, not like puppets, but like agents, with their own behavior, their own reactions. So, here's the question we can no longer avoid. If your brain can simulate other minds inside your own experience, then how do you distinguish between what is you and what is not? And now we return to one of our deepest loops. What is your brain hiding from you? Or perhaps more accurately, what is it constructing so convincingly that you never question it? Because in sleep paralysis, the construction becomes visible. You can see it happening. You can feel how real it is, even when you know something is wrong. And that is the key insight. Reality is not defined by what is real. It is defined by what feels real, and that feeling can be generated. Now here comes the shift, the one that reframes everything. What if your waking reality feels stable? Not because it is fundamentally different from dreams, but because your brain is better at maintaining the illusion? More consistent, more constrained, more reinforced, but still constructed. Now imagine what happens when that construction is interrupted, not completely, just slightly. A glitch, a delay, a mismatch. You've experienced this. A moment where something feels off, a familiar place that suddenly feels unfamiliar. A face you know that looks slightly different. A memory that doesn't quite align. These are tiny fractures in the model, usually corrected instantly, but they reveal something important. The system is not perfect. It is constantly adjusting, constantly repairing. Now bring this back to sleep, because every night your brain lets go of that stability and enters a state where construction becomes fluid, where reality is no longer fixed, and in that state, something new becomes possible. Not just imagination, but recombination, new patterns, new connections, new structures. And this leads us to the next question. If your brain can generate entire realities and merge them with perception, then what determines which version you experience? Why this one? Why now? Because in the next part, we're going to explore something even deeper. There are theories that suggest your brain is not just reacting to reality, but predicting it ahead of time, constantly. And what you experience is not the present, but a controlled prediction of what is about to happen. If that's true, then reality is not something you receive. It's something you anticipate. And that changes everything. Let's continue. And now we step into one of the most quietly radical ideas in all of neuroscience. What if you are never actually experiencing the present moment? Not directly, not as it truly is, but as a prediction of what your brain expects the present to be. At first, that sounds subtle, almost trivial, but it changes everything, because it means what you call reality is not something arriving from the outside world in real time. It is something your brain is constantly generating, just ahead of time. Let's slow this down. Your brain receives sensory information from your eyes, your ears, your skin. But this information takes time to process. Milliseconds, tiny delays, but delays nonetheless. Now imagine if your brain simply waited for all that data to arrive before constructing your experience. You would always be slightly behind reality, reacting too late, missing opportunities. In a world where survival matters, that delay would be dangerous. So your brain does something remarkable. It predicts. It uses past experience, patterns, memory to generate a model of what is about to happen, and then it compares that model to incoming data. If the prediction matches, you experience a smooth, continuous reality. If it doesn't, your brain adjusts, quietly, instantly. Now, here's the key insight. What you experience is not raw sensory input. It is the prediction that was close enough to be accepted. Reality is a controlled prediction. Now, pause, because this connects directly to everything we've explored so far. Dreams are predictions without external correction. Sleep paralysis is prediction overlapping with perception. Lucid dreaming is awareness inside prediction. And waking life, it is prediction kept in check by sensory input, but still prediction. Now, let's open another loop. If your brain is constantly predicting reality, then what determines those predictions? Why do you see what you see and not something else? The answer lies in your past. Everything you've experienced, everything you've learned, every pattern you've recognized is stored and used to shape what you expect. In other words, your reality is influenced by your history. Two people can look at the same situation and see different things, not because the world is different, but because their predictions are. Now, think about dreams again. Dreams often pull from memory, but they don't replay it exactly. They reshape it, combine it, distort it, which suggests that prediction is not just about accuracy, it's about flexibility, exploration. Now, here comes the shift, the one that deepens the mystery. What if your brain is not trying to predict reality perfectly? What if it's trying to predict it efficiently, just enough accuracy to function, just enough stability to survive, but not necessarily to reveal the full truth? Because full truth might be too complex, too overwhelming. So your brain simplifies, and in doing so, it creates a version of reality that is useful, but incomplete. Now, connect this back to the invisible layers we mentioned at the very beginning. If your brain only predicts what it expects and only corrects what it detects, then anything outside that expectation might never enter your experience, not because it isn't there, but because it was never predicted and never corrected. It remains invisible. Now, let's take this one step further. There are moments when predictions fail, unexpected events. Something doesn't match what your brain expected. And in that moment, you feel surprise. Attention sharpens. Your brain updates its model. Now imagine if those prediction errors became large enough, yet frequent enough. Would reality begin to feel unstable? Would your sense of certainty start to break down? Because this happens. In certain altered states, people report a heightened awareness of unpredictability. The world feels more vivid, more detailed, but also less stable, as if the predictive system is no longer smoothing everything out. Now bring this back to sleep, because during dreaming, prediction is no longer constrained by external correction, so it becomes freer, more creative, less bound. And that's why dreams can feel so strange. They are predictions without limits. Now, here comes the deeper question. If waking reality is prediction constrained and dreaming is prediction unconstrained, then what lies beyond both? Is there a level of reality that exists independent of prediction, or is all experience fundamentally constructed through this process? Now, we return to one of our earliest questions of what are you actually experiencing right now? The world itself, or your brain's best guess of it? And if it's a guess, how close is it to what is really there? Because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more precise. There are moments when the brain's predictions become so strong that they override reality completely, not in dreams. But while you are awake, illusions, hallucinations, experiences where what you perceive does not match what is physically present, and yet they feel completely real. And when we understand those, we begin to see something clearly. Reality is not just what is out there, it is what your brain is confident enough to believe. We're getting very close now, closer to the core of what perception really is. And once we reach it, the idea of an objective reality may feel very different than it did before. Let's continue. And now we arrive at a place where the illusion becomes visible, not because it disappears, but because it slips, just enough for you to notice. Have you ever seen something that wasn't really there, a shadow that looked like a figure, a shape in the dark that seemed to move, a voice you thought you heard but couldn't find? For a brief moment, it feels real. Your body reacts, your attention locks in, and then it dissolves, and you realize it wasn't what you thought. These are small moments, but they reveal something profound. Your brain does not wait for certainty. It commits before it confirms. Now, let's expand that idea. There are illusions that don't disappear. Not quickly, not easily. Visual illusions where two lines of equal length appear different, colors that shift, depending on their surroundings, images that seem to move, even when they are completely still. You can know, intellectually, that they are illusions, and yet you still see them, because your perception is not controlled by what you know. It is controlled by how your brain processes patterns. Now, here's the key insight. Reality, as you experience it, is not corrected by logic. It is constructed before logic has a chance to intervene, which means what feels real can override what is true. Now, let's go deeper. There are conditions where this effect becomes stronger, hallucinations, not just in dreams, but while fully awake. People can see things, hear voices, feel presences that are not physically there. And to them, these experiences are not like reality. They are reality, just as vivid, just as convincing. Now pause here, because this is one of the most important realizations in this entire journey. The brain does not label something as real based on whether it exists externally. It labels something as real based on how strongly it is predicted and how little it is corrected. In other words, if a perception is stable enough and consistent enough, your brain accepts it, even if it is entirely generated. Now, connect this back to everything we've explored. Dreams feel real because they are stable within themselves. Sleep paralysis feels real, and because the dream is anchored to your environment. Waking life feels real because predictions are constantly corrected and reinforced. But all of them share the same mechanism: construction. Now let's open another loop. If your brain determines reality based on prediction and confidence, then what happens when those predictions become too strong? When the brain stops updating based on external input, reality becomes rigid, locked, and in extreme cases, detached from the external world. This is not just theory. It happens, and it reveals something critical. Your experience of reality is not guaranteed to match what is physically there. It is a best guess. Now, here comes the shift, the one that reframes everything once again. What if the goal of your brain is not to show you reality, but to minimize surprise, to keep things predictable, stable, to reduce uncertainty? Because uncertainty is costly. It requires attention, energy, processing. So your brain prefers a stable model, even if it is slightly wrong, and over a chaotic one that is perfectly accurate. And this explains something that might have always felt a little strange. Why does reality feel so consistent? Why do things behave in predictable ways? Because your brain is constantly smoothing, adjusting, stabilizing the experience, not passively, actively. Now, think about dreams again. Dreams feel unstable because that stabilizing force is reduced. Predictions run freely. They shift quickly. They don't need to match an external world. Now, imagine what happens when the stabilizing system and the predictive system are perfectly balanced. You get waking reality, a controlled hallucination. That is continuously corrected. Now, let's return to one of our deepest questions. What is actually out there? Not what you perceive, but what exists, independent of your perception. Because if everything you experience is filtered, predicted, and constructed, then the raw version of reality might be something you never directly encounter, not once, not even for a moment. And that is a difficult idea to sit with, because it means you are always one step removed, always interacting with a model. Now, here comes the mini shift, the one that quietly changes everything. What if that's not a limitation, but a necessity? What if reality, in its raw form, is too complex, too dense, too overwhelming to be experienced directly? And what you perceive is the only version you could possibly handle, because if that's true, then your brain is not hiding reality from you. It is protecting you from it. Now, bring this back to sleep, because every night your brain changes the model, relaxes it, reconstructs it, explores new variations, and in doing so, it reveals something important. Reality is not fixed. It is flexible, dependent, shaped by the system that experiences it. And that leads us to the next question. If reality is constructed, and if that construction can change, then can it be trained? Can it be altered intentionally? Can you learn to shift the way you experience reality even while awake? Because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more intriguing. There are people who train themselves to become aware inside dreams regularly, to stabilize those experiences, to explore them with intention. And what they discover begins to blur the boundary even further, not just between waking and dreaming, but between perception and control. We're getting very close now, closer to the point where the final question can no longer be avoided. If reality is constructed, then who or what is constructing it? Let's continue. And now we arrive at a question that is both simple and deeply unsettling. If reality is constructed, then who or what is actually doing the constructing? At first, the answer seems obvious: your brain. But that answer is incomplete, because your brain is not a single thing. It is a network, billions of neurons, trillions of connections, processes happening in parallel, most of them completely outside your awareness. And yet, from all of that activity, a single experience emerges, a unified sense of reality, a continuous you. Now pause, because this is where the mystery deepens. There is no single point in your brain where everything comes together. No central screen, no hidden observer. And yet, you experience the world as if there is one, as if there is a center, a place where you are, watching, experiencing, deciding, But neuroscience suggests that this center may not actually exist. It may be constructed, just like everything else. Now, let's slow this down. Your brain processes vision in one area, sound in another, touch somewhere else, memory, emotion, prediction, all distributed, and yet you don't experience them separately. You experience a single, coherent world. So the question becomes, how? How does a distributed system create a unified experience? This is known as the binding problem. And despite decades of research, there is still no complete answer. But there are clues. Your brain doesn't combine everything in one place. It synchronizes. Our different regions align their activity. They communicate. They create patterns that are consistent enough to feel unified. And from that synchronization, your experience emerges, not from a single source, but from a process. Now, here's the shift. If your sense of reality is an emergent process, then your sense of self may be as well. Not a fixed entity, but a pattern, a dynamic construction, one that updates moment by moment. Now think about your own experience. Have you ever felt like a slightly different person at different times? More confident, more anxious, more focused, more distant? The you that exists is not identical from moment to moment. It shifts, and yet it feels continuous, stable, because your brain maintains that illusion. It stitches together a narrative, a story, idea of being the same person. Now bring this back to dreams, because in dreams, that narrative loosens. You can become someone else. You can shift identities. You can exist without a clear sense of self at all. And yet, the experience continues, which suggests something profound. The self is not required for experience to exist. It is added, constructed. Now, let's open another loop. If your sense of self is constructed, and your sense of reality is constructed, then what remains? That is not constructed. Is there anything in your experience that is truly direct? Or is everything mediated by this system? Because if everything is constructed, then the observer, the one who feels like you, may not be separate from the process at all. You are not watching the system. You are the system. Or more precisely, you are the experience that the system produces. Now, here comes the deeper shift. What if consciousness is not something your brain has, but something your brain does? An activity, a process, not a thing. And if that's true, then consciousness might not be located anywhere. It might be a pattern of interaction. Now connect this back to everything we've explored. Dreams are patterns of activity without external constraint. Waking life is patterns of activity guided by input. Sleep paralysis is overlapping patterns. Lucid dreaming is awareness within the pattern. And your sense of self is the pattern, recognizing itself. Now, pause here, because this leads to one of the deepest questions that we've encountered so far. If your brain constructs reality and constructs the self, then what is the relationship between the two? Is the self inside reality, or is reality inside the self? Because depending on how you answer that, everything changes. Now let's take one more step. There are moments, rare but reported, where people experience a complete loss of the sense of self, not unconsciousness, not sleep, but awareness, without identity, no I, no center, just experience happening. And when they return, they often describe something unusual, a sense that the boundary between themselves and the world was never as solid as it seemed. Now, we're not making conclusions, but we are asking the question, if the self can dissolve and experience continues, then what exactly is experiencing, and what does that say about the nature of reality? Because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more intriguing. If reality is constructed, and if the self is constructed, then is there a deeper level that both are emerging from? A layer beneath perception, beneath identity that gives rise to everything you experience. We're getting very close now, closer to the point where the mystery stops being abstract and starts becoming something you can feel, something you can notice in your own experience. Let's continue. And now we move closer to the deepest layer of this entire exploration. Not the brain, not perception, not even the self, but what lies beneath all of them. Because if everything we've experienced so far is constructed, filtered, predicted, then the obvious question becomes unavoidable. What is it constructed from? What is the raw material before your brain shapes it, before your mind interprets it, before your sense of self claims it? Let's slow this down. Right now, you are aware, not of anything specific, and just aware. Even if you close your eyes, even if you stop focusing on sounds, even if you let your thoughts drift, there is still something present, a kind of background, a field in which everything appears. Thoughts appear in it, sensations appear in it, dreams appear in it. Even your sense of self appears in it. But what is it? We usually don't notice it, because we are focused on what appears, not where it appears. But if you shift your attention just slightly, you may begin to sense it, not as an object, but as a space, an openness, a silent backdrop. That is always there. Now here's where things become interesting. This background awareness does not seem to change the way everything else does. Your thoughts change. Your emotions shift. Your perceptions come and go. Even your sense of identity can transform. But this remains. Constant, unmoving. Now we open the deepest loop. Is this awareness something your brain produces, or is it something your brain is revealing? Because if everything else is constructed, and this remains, then maybe this is the closest thing to direct experience that you have. Not filtered content, but the capacity for experience itself. Now, bring this back to sleep, because during deep sleep, there are moments when there are no dreams, no images, no thoughts, no narrative, and yet, when you wake up, you often say, I slept, I was there. But what was there? If there were no experiences, no content, no self, what remained? Some researchers suggest that even in deep sleep, there is a minimal form of awareness, not of things, but of existence itself, a kind of silent presence. And if that's true, then awareness does not depend on the content of experience. It is more fundamental. Now connect this back to everything we've explored. Waking life is awareness filled with structured perception. Dreaming is awareness filled with unconstrained generation. Sleep paralysis is awareness caught between both. And deep sleep may be awareness without content. If that's true, then awareness is the constant. Reality, as you know it, is the variation. Now pause here, because this leads to one of the most profound questions in all of science and philosophy. Is reality something that exists independently and is perceived by awareness? Or is reality something that appears within awareness? Because those two possibilities are very different. If reality exists independently, then awareness is a tool, a way of accessing it. But if reality appears within awareness, then awareness is primary, and everything else is secondary. Now we're not choosing an answer, but we are noticing something. Every experience you have ever had has appeared within awareness. You have never experienced anything outside of it, not once. Now, here comes the quiet shift, the one that reframes everything. What if the invisible part of reality is not something out there beyond your senses, but something so close, so constant, that you've never thought to look at it? Not hidden by distance, but hidden by familiarity. Now think about dreams again. When you are inside a dream, the dream world feels external. But when you wake up, you realize it was all happening within your mind. Now imagine if waking reality is similar, but on a different scale. Not identical, but structurally similar. A world appearing within awareness, stabilized, consistent, shared, but still experienced internally. Now, this doesn't mean the external world doesn't exist. It means your access to it is always mediated, always shaped, always appearing within awareness. Now we return to our original mystery. What if most of reality is invisible? At first, we thought that meant hidden layers outside our perception, and that may still be true. But now, there's another possibility. What if the largest part of reality is not what you see, but what allows you to see it all? Not the content, but the field in which content appears. Now, let that settle. Because in the next part, we're going to bring everything together. The brain, prediction, dreams, the self, awareness. All of it into a single question. If reality is constructed, if perception is filtered, if the self is a pattern, and awareness is constant, then what does it actually mean to be awake? Not just physically, but fundamentally. We're very close now. Let's continue. And now we begin to bring everything together. All the layers we've explored. The brain, prediction, dreams, the self, awareness. They all converge here. In a single question. That sounds simple, but reaches deeper than anything we've asked so far. What does it actually mean to be awake? Not just physically, not just with your eyes open, moving through the world, responding to things, but fundamentally, what does awake really mean? If everything you experience is constructed, let's slow this down. Right now, you feel awake because your experience is stable. Your surroundings are consistent Your thoughts follow a clear thread. Your sense of self is continuous. And most importantly, you trust it. You trust that what you are experiencing corresponds to something real. But we've seen that this trust is generated, maintained. It is not absolute. So what if being awake is not about what you are experiencing, but how you are relating to it? Because in dreams, you are immersed. You don't question the experience. You move through it as if it is reality. But in lucid dreams, something changes. You are still inside the experience, but you are aware that it is constructed. And that awareness changes everything. Now, bring that idea into waking life. What if being truly awake is not just experiencing reality, but recognizing that your experience of reality is being constructed? Not intellectually, but directly, moment by moment. Now, here's the subtle shift. This doesn't mean that reality disappears. It doesn't mean that the world becomes unreal. It means you begin to see it differently, less as a fixed thing and more as a dynamic process, something that is happening rather than something that simply is. Now imagine what that feels like. You are still seeing, still hearing, still thinking. But there is an added layer, a quiet recognition that all of it is appearing, that it is being shaped, that it is not as solid as it seems, and that recognition creates space, space between you and the experience. Not distance, but flexibility. Now let's connect this to something very practical. Have you ever been caught in a strong emotion, anger, fear, anxiety? In those moments, the experience feels absolute, overwhelming, real. But sometimes something shifts. You become aware that you are feeling it, not just inside it, but aware of it. And when that happens, even slightly, the intensity changes. Not because the emotion disappears, but because your relationship to it has changed. You are no longer fully identified with it. Now scale that up. What if the same thing is possible, not just with emotions, but with all of perception? What if you can experience reality fully and at the same time recognize that it is being constructed? This is not detachment. It's clarity. Now we open the final loop. If being awake, it means recognizing the constructed nature of experience, then what is the purpose of sleep? Because sleep seems like the opposite, a loss of awareness, a descent into dreams. But what if it's not the opposite at all? What if sleep is part of the same system? A necessary phase that allows the brain to reset, reorganize, and explore different constructions of reality. Because during dreams, you experience worlds that are not constrained by waking rules. You explore possibilities that waking life cannot support. You process patterns that are too complex for conscious thought. And then you return with a refreshed model, a slightly updated reality. Now here comes the deeper realization. So even waking and dreaming are not separate. They are complementary. Two modes of the same system. One stable, one flexible, one constrained, one exploratory. And your experience of reality moves between them every single day. Now let that settle, because it leads us to one final question. If reality is constructed, if the self is constructed, if waking and dreaming are modes, and awareness is constant, then what is the role of you in all of this? Are you the experiencer, the observer, the controller, or something else entirely? Because in the next part, the final part, we're going to step back and look at the entire picture, not just how reality is constructed, but what that means for how you live inside it. And once you see it clearly, even for a moment, something shifts, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, like realizing that something you've always taken for granted was never quite what it seemed. Let's continue. And now we step back and look at the whole picture, not as separate ideas, but as one continuous system. Everything we've explored has been pointing here. The brain filters reality. The brain predicts reality. The brain constructs reality. Dreams reveal that construction. Sleep loosens it. Lucid awareness observes it. And beneath all of it, there is awareness itself, constant, unmoving. Now, the question is no longer, what is reality? But something more personal. What does this mean for how you live inside it? Let's begin simply. If your experience of reality is constructed, then your experience is flexible, not completely, not instantly, but more than it seems. Because the model your brain builds is influenced by patterns, habits, expectations, attention, what you focus on, what you repeat, what you believe. All of it shapes the predictions your brain makes, and those predictions shape your experience. Now, think about that. Two people in the same situation can feel completely different realities. One sees opportunity, the other sees threat. One feels calm, the other feels overwhelmed. The external world may be the same, but the internal model is different, and that model is what they experience. Now, here comes the shift. If the model can change, then your experience of reality can change, not by forcing the world, but by understanding how the construction works. Now let's connect this to something very real. Stress, anxiety, fear. These feel like reactions to the world, but they are also predictions. Your brain anticipating what might happen, projecting outcomes, filling in gaps. And sometimes those predictions become so strong that they shape your entire experience. Now, imagine what happens when you begin to notice that, not to suppress it, not to fight it, but simply to see it. This is a prediction. This is my brain constructing a possible reality. And in that moment, something small shifts. A little space appears. And in that space, there is choice. Not absolute control, but influence. Now extend that idea further. Attention. Where you place your attention is one of the most powerful factors in shaping your experience, because attention tells your brain what matters, and what matters gets processed more deeply, becomes more stable, more real. So if you constantly focus on threat, your world becomes threatening. If you focus on possibility, your world opens. Not because reality itself changes, but because your model of it does. Now, this is not about ignoring reality. It's about recognizing that your experience is always being shaped. Now, let's return to sleep, because sleep is where this system resets, where patterns are reorganized, where predictions are updated, where the brain explores new combinations. And this is why sleep matters so deeply, not just for rest, but for recalibration. Every night, your brain releases its grip on the current model. It allows flexibility, it allows change, and then, when you wake up, it rebuilds. Now, here comes the deeper realization. You are not stuck in a fixed version of reality. You are participating in an ongoing construction, and that construction is influenced by how you think, how you focus, how you relate to your experience. Now, let's open the final layer. If awareness is constant and everything else is constructed, then perhaps the most stable place you can rest is not in the content of experience, but in awareness itself, because content changes, thoughts change, emotions rise and fall, perceptions shift, but awareness remains. And when you begin to notice that, something quiet happens. You become less entangled in every fluctuation, less pulled by every thought, less defined by every emotion, not detached, but grounded. Now imagine living from that place, experiencing everything fully, but not being completely consumed by it, seeing reality, and at the same time recognizing its fluid nature. That is a different way of being awake, not just conscious, but aware of consciousness. Now we return to the final question. If most of reality is invisible, what have we actually discovered? Yes, there are things beyond your senses. Yes, your brain filters more than it reveals. Yes, your perception is a construction. But perhaps the most important discovery is this. The invisible part of reality is not just out there. It is in here, in the processes you don't see, in the patterns you don't notice, in the awareness that quietly holds everything together. And once you begin to notice that, even slightly, the world doesn't disappear, but it becomes a little less rigid, a little more open, a little more mysterious. And that brings us to the final step, because there is one more thing we need to explore. If you are part of this construction, then what is your role going forward? Not as an observer, not as a passive experiencer, but as something more. Let's finish this journey, and now we arrive at the final step. Not an answer, but a shift, because everything we've explored has been leading here, not to explain reality completely, but to change the way you experience it. So, let's return, one last time, to the question that began all of this. What if most of reality is invisible? At the beginning, that question felt external. Hidden layers, unknown forces, things beyond your senses, and those may exist. But now, you've seen something deeper. The invisible part of reality is not just what you can't see. It's what you don't realize you are doing. Right now, constantly, your brain is filtering, predicting, constructing, stabilizing. And from that process, a world appears, a world that feels solid, consistent, real, but is in many ways a controlled interpretation, a living model. And here's the quiet realization. that changes everything. You are not just inside that model, you are part of the process that creates it. Not consciously, not completely, but undeniably. Every expectation you hold shapes prediction. Every pattern you repeat reinforces structure. Every focus of attention strengthens what becomes real to you. So the question is no longer, what is reality? But something far more powerful. How are you participating in it? Now let's slow down, because this is where things become practical, not abstract, not philosophical, but something you can actually feel right now. Take a moment. Notice your thoughts. They appear. You didn't choose the exact next thought. It arrived. Now notice your body. Sensations, pressure, temperature, they appear. Now notice the space in which all of that is happening. Awareness itself, quiet, unmoving, always here. Now, here's the shift. If thoughts appear, if sensations appear, if even your sense of self appears, then what you are may not be any of those things. You are not just the content, you are the field in which the content appears. Now sit with that, because it changes your role completely. You are no longer just reacting to reality. You are experiencing the process of it unfolding. And once you see that, even slightly, something subtle happens. You gain distance, not separation, but clarity. Thoughts still come, but they don't define you as strongly. Emotions still arise, but they don't trap you as deeply. Perception still feels real, but you know it is shaped, and that knowing is quiet power. Now let's connect this back to everything we've explored. Dreams showed you that reality can be constructed. Sleep showed you that the construction can change. Lucid awareness showed you that you can recognize it. Prediction showed you that your brain is always shaping experience. And awareness showed you that there is something constant beneath all of it. Now here comes the final realization and seek. You don't need to escape reality to understand it. You don't need to control every thought or change every perception. You only need to see what is already happening. Because once you see it, the relationship changes. And when the relationship changes, experience changes. Not because the world transforms instantly, but because you are no longer fully identified with every part of the construction. Now imagine living like that, still engaged, still present, still experiencing everything, but with a quiet awareness in the background, a recognition that what feels absolute is actually dynamic, that what feels fixed is actually fluid, that what feels like reality is a process unfolding. And in that space, something opens. Curiosity, flexibility, a sense of possibility. Because if reality is constructed, then it is not rigid. And if it is not rigid, then there is room to see differently, room to respond differently, room to live differently. Now, we return to the final question. What is your role in all of this? You are not the controller of everything, but you are not powerless either. You are part of the system, a participant, an experiencer with influence. And that influence begins with awareness, with noticing, with seeing, how the construction unfolds. Now, here's something quiet but important. You don't have to hold on to this idea. You don't have to force yourself to think about it all the time. In fact, the more you try to control it, the more it slips. This is not something to grasp. It's something to notice again and again, in small moments, a thought appearing, an emotion rising, a perception shifting, and each time you recognize it, even briefly, you are a little more awake. Not in a dramatic sense, but in a subtle, steady way. Now, let's bring this to a close. Everything we've explored leads to a simple but profound possibility. Maybe reality is not something you fully understand, but something you continuously participate in. Maybe sleep is not an escape from reality, but part of how you explore it. Maybe dreams are not illusions, but variations of the same process. And maybe being awake is not about rejecting those experiences, but recognizing the nature of all of them. Now, before we end, just take one more moment. Notice where you are. Notice the sounds, the sensations, the thoughts moving gently in the background. And notice that all of it is appearing right here, right now, and something in you is aware of it, quietly, effortlessly, always. If this journey made you pause even for a second and see something slightly differently, then you're already closer to the answer than you think. And if you'd like to continue exploring these kinds of deep, quiet mysteries, you can gently like the video or subscribe to the channel. Not as a habit, but as a small signal that this kind of exploration matters to you, because there are still more questions ahead, more layers, more patterns, more things that seemed obvious until you look a little closer. And next time, we might explore something even deeper. If reality is constructed, then what happens when the construction ends? Not in sleep, not in dreams, but at the very edge of consciousness itself. Until then, just notice and rest in the quiet awareness that has been here the entire time.